In this video, I want to show the two versions of FactoryTalk Optix Studio that we have available to us. One is a desktop version, and the other is a cloud-based version. But before I do that, I need to talk about what are FactoryTalk Optix design options. There's two options available to us: the standard and the pro. And again, what FactoryTalk Optix Studio is it's the development tool required to create a FactoryTalk Optix application. So the standard version is a completely free and unlicensed version to use. But what comes with the standard version is basically the ability to only run it on your laptop or PC. So there's just a local repository available to you. And again, it's a version that only runs on your PC. The professional version, you could still use the Studio laptop or PC version, but you can also use the cloud-based version of Studio. And that cloud-based version is inside of FactoryTalk Hub. The other advantage of the Pro license is that you can use remote repositories such as GitHub, and in a future release, the ability to use the FactoryTalk Vault to store your Optix applications and then share them amongst your team or other collaborators. In fact, the Pro Edition can also give you the ability to deploy your applications from the cloud using FactoryTalk Remote Access. So Pro Edition gives you, again, the ability to work anywhere, cloud-based, so work anywhere, and then deploy pretty much anywhere. Whereas the standard license is going to be installed on your local PC, and you'll need to be local to the equipment in order to deploy the application. So the Pro license does come with a subscription cost, whereas the standard license is completely free. So I want to show the differences. So both editors are completely the same as far as building and creating Optix applications. Just again, one is cloud-based, one will be run on your computer. So I want to first start by opening my PC version of Studio. So from some previous videos, we've seen this display here, FactoryTalk Optix Studio. When I first open it up, I have the ability to either create a new project or I can open existing projects. So down here, I just have some recent projects. Again, if I'm using the free version, if I'm not a Pro licensed user, then I will only be able to open from local repositories. A local repository would basically be an application that's on my PC in a folder with other Optix applications. If I'm a professional user, then I have the ability to open up a remote repository. So remote repositories would be things that are stored on GitHub. So in order to have access to GitHub, I can come up here to the settings and go to FactoryTalk Optix Studio options. And under version control, I can link my GitHub account. So GitHub is cloud-based, and if you want to use the on-prem version of GitHub, then that's called GitLab. But I have linked currently to my GitHub account where I can store my applications in GitHub repositories and then collaborate, share those, or let the cloud-based version of Studio have access to these. So I'm going to open up my Modbus test. This is one that I've used in a previous video. And we can see here that we have our COM drivers pre-built from the previous video. And then I also have some pages built. And if I were to go into the emulator, I can actually, since I'm connected to my controller, I can see that my logic is running. And I'm getting my Modbus updates just like I showed in a previous video. So local version Studio, and then able to kind of test out my application with a direct connection to my controller using the emulator. So I'm gonna go ahead and leave this up. So next we'll go into FactoryTalk Hub. So in order for us to get to the cloud-based version of Optix Studio, we have to use Rockwell's FactoryTalk Hub. It's completely free to be able to access the hub. You just need to sign in with your Rockwell account. But in order to use this cloud-based version of Optix Studio, I do have to have what's called an entitlement. So I do have to have the professional edition entitlement. So entitlements are basically like a license. It's a different terminology used in the hub. But again, for me to use the FactoryTalk Optix Pro license, I would need to subscribe to this, have a subscription license for it. That would give me an entitlement that I can link into my FactoryTalk Hub, and therefore I can use that. So we go in the FactoryTalk Hub, and I'm going to enter FactoryTalk Optix. Now, FactoryTalk Optix does require that we use an authenticator, such as Microsoft Authenticator or Google. Oops, my number just changed on me. 783433 is my code. So once I initially do this, I will choose an authentication app and then link my FactoryTalk Hub to my authentication app, and I can enter the code each time I try to log in. So when I go into Optix, we have a few things here. We have our releases, we have our entitlements, basically what are we licensed for. We have a runtime sizing tool, which helps us pick how many tokens we would need when we want to deploy the runtime. And then we have resources, which is a place where Rockwell has placed some demo applications that we can actually open and use and look at. Back under releases, this is actually where I would go in order to download my desktop version of Studio. So I could actually come in here without any entitlements and download the desktop version of Optix Studio. But if I want to open it up in the browser, I do need to be entitled to do that, again, as a pro licensed user. So you can see we have the last version I used, and then this is the latest release. So we can actually continue to use an older version, or we could use the latest release. It just happens that they're both the same, so I'm going to say continue in browser. Now once Studio opens in the browser, it looks exactly like the Studio version that we saw initially here in the desktop version. So they're identical. We have the ability to create a default project or create an Optix panel project. I do have some recent projects, but they're going to be different. The difference here is that I don't necessarily have access to my local repository, which is again on my desktop of my computer. But what I do have access to are all of my remote repositories that are in GitHub. So the process would be that if I were to, if I was creating my project here in the desktop version, I can, once I save my project, I can push it up into into GitHub and store it up in GitHub essentially, and then make it available to the cloud version. So having a GitHub account is also a free thing to have, and then you basically would create a repository inside your GitHub account, and then you would basically say upload to remote repository, and that would send the Optix application up here into the repository you created in GitHub. And then once you're in the Optix cloud-based Studio, I can pull that GitHub application, essentially open it up from the remote, as a remote repository from GitHub. So you can see my link here to this Modbus test is github.com, and then my account, and then the name of the project .git. So I'm going to choose that. It populates my remote URL there in that box, and I'll say open. When I do that, I come here to my again, the Studio looks just like what I was seeing here in my desktop Studio. If I go to dashboard, I see the exact kind of thing, same thing. If I were to come to UI and then Pages, Pump 1, here's my Pump 1 screen in the cloud. Again, if I come back here to my local installation, here's my Pump 1 screen, right? So I have these same editing capabilities that I have, in the desktop version, here in the cloud version. I can click on these, look at my properties, assign the tags to them. I have my, over here I have my COM drivers, Modbus, the Micro 820, here's all the tags. Same as what we had in the local version of the Studio project. The one difference now is that if I open up the emulator or create the emulator here in the cloud version, is that it's not going to be connected to my actual controller. So my controller is tied to my PC over Ethernet, but you can see these red X's are basically indications that there is no connection to these tags. Aren't seeing a connection right now. Even though these are tied to tags in the controller, being that they're switches, they don't show red X's, where these were indications kind of showing and reading the value from the controller, so they're showing as not available. So in the current configuration, I can't connect to the live controller here in the cloud version, but I can still run my emulator and look at the various screens that I've created. Whereas when I was back in my local version of Studio, I can fire up my emulator and I do have access to live data since I am connected directly to the controller. So if I were to actually make changes here in the cloud-based version, I can then save them and send them, or the terminology is push to remote. I said upload to remote earlier, but basically push to remote. So I can make these changes, I can save and commit them, and I can push them to the remote repository. And then that's one way that we can use to kind of collaborate, amongst various team members, is each of us who have access to those GitHub repositories, we can download them, use them, change them, and then push them back up into the repository when we're done. So again, if we're going to use just a standard version of FactoryTalk Optix Studio, again, unlicensed, totally free, limitation is that we don't have the ability to do collaboration, and that we can't send our, we can't link to the remote repositories that are inside of GitHub. I can always go to GitHub and download the repository and then open that downloaded version of the repository in my offline, or in my regular version of Optix Studio. So I can still use GitHub, I can still collaborate. I just don't have it built in to Studio, Optix Studio, like we do when we have the professional license. If I want to use the cloud-based version, then the advantage here is that I don't have to have any version of any software installed on my computer. I can go to FactoryTalk Hub, I can log into Optix and go into Optix Studio, and I can completely work all in the cloud, just as if I was using the desktop version of Studio. So pretty nice. It gives us the ability to log in on any computer, anywhere. As long as we have an internet connection, we can get into Studio, we can look at our projects that we had stored in our remote repository, such as GitHub, and then still work and collaborate, even though we may not be tied back to our normal desktop computer. So lots of flexibility with the Pro license.